Welcome to Washington in Focus Daily. It is Tuesday, May 12th, 2026. I'm Carlene Johnson, the Center Square's state government reporter. And in today's episode, there is officially a ballot title and a ballot number for an initiative to potentially repeal the income tax. That was announced today by Let's Go Washington. We have all the details for you coming up. Then a group has filed a public disclosure complaint against Undivided podcaster Brandi Kruse. You may recall she's been quite involved in some of Let's Go Washington's efforts for the two ballot initiatives that you're going to be voting on in November, the parental rights restoration and also the other one to protect girls in sports. According to this group that's coming out filing the PDC complaint against her, she's not allowed to speak out publicly because they contend that LGW, Let's Go Washington, is in fact funding her. She denies that completely and says that they're way off base. So we're going to get into that. There was quite a bit of back and forth on that today, and we were a party to all of that discussion. And then finally, the Washington Professional Educator Standards Board is rewriting the rules, and your child's superintendent, if they're in a public school or even a charter school, which is also a public school in the state of Washington, could lose their career for keeping you informed. This kind of all relates today because this goes back to the amendment of the Parental Bill of Rights and the passage of House Bill 1296 during the 2025 legislative session. And the contention here from the folks with the PESB is if they're going to comply with the state law, they need to make some policy changes to make it so that state superintendents who willfully are not complying with this, and we have several school districts not willing to comply with the rules from OSPI on this, that they could basically remove them from their position. There's a big vote happening this week. So all of that coming up in today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily. So let's dive in. Today, Let's Go Washington announced their path forward for what they hope will be a repeal of the income tax. We'll put up this to show you that this is going to be IP 26, which is an initiative to the people, and 26 is the year, and the number is 645. So IP 26-645 is an initiative to the people. It states it would provide a straightforward repeal of the tax and give Washington voters the opportunity to vote yes to repeal the income tax. If you haven't been watching us for very long, or maybe not have paid attention to Washington politics, I don't blame you sometimes, but Washington's Democrats, the majority, passed a new income tax. Senate Bill 6346 was signed into law by the governor at the very end of the 2026 legislative session. For now, it's a tax on millionaires whose earned income is in excess of $1 million or a combined household income in excess of $1 million. And you're taxed at 9.9% on that income. There's no question, based on even supporters of this, that it's likely to end up being a tax on all earned income. Doesn't matter how much money you make in the years to come in the state of Washington. So there's this effort to push back on this and say you can't do this unless you amend the state constitution. So here is Let's Go Washington's Brian Haywood in this morning's press conference announcing their initiative campaign.
This is an initiative that we think is very strong, that will be does a couple of things. I'll outline just quickly what it does. Number one is it repeals the current income tax. Number two, it bans future income taxes, but it's more specific in that it bans both a tax on the income itself or the activity that created the income. And I know that if I was Jamie Peterson, I would be doing this to say this is something that only lawyers can understand. But they've tried to be sneaky in the way that they designed the tax to say, well, it's not really banning, it's not taxing income, it's taxing the way. We said, we don't care how you define it. Income tax is illegal in this state. And then the final thing that that our initiative does is it actually defines income itself, so there can be no lack of clarity about what the definition of income is, so they can't play games with it. And we put this into Section 82, which is dealing with taxes. So it structurally now it will be in the code, which makes it much harder for the legislature to monkey around and try to thwart the people and insert this income tax.
So Haywood said that their initiative is not going to repeal any of what he called the goodies the Democrats promised in the income tax bill. And mainly this is going to be the expansion of the working families tax credit. That was a huge expansion, so that a lot of when the revenue comes in from the income tax starting in 2028 earnings to be paid in 2029, so that a lot of that would be going to, provide some tax relief to a lot more Washington families. That was something that, they could get behind and support. Well, Republicans, I should remind you, Republicans had a separate proposal to do the same kind of expansion of the working families tax credit without using the income tax as a mechanism to provide that tax relief. So Let's Go Washington is saying that their initiative is going to allow that dramatic expansion of this tax credit and some of the other, goodies, as they call it, in the income tax proposal to remain there, even if the income tax bill is repealed. So, um, I'll remind you as well that the voters in this state have rejected an income tax multiple times, and our state Supreme Court has also said it is unconstitutional. So, without an amendment to our state constitution, which says that our income is property and must be taxed uniformly, that we can't do it this route. So, you can expect likely within the next few days, a week at the most, you're going to see folks out supporting this income tax repeal outside your local Walmart and Fred Meyer and other stores, or at your church or in your neighborhoods. Um, One thing that I did ask Haywood and Let's Go Washington today during their press availability is how they're prepared to respond, because you may recall in 2024, when signature gatherers were out for the two initiatives that'll be on this year's ballot, the one to restore parental rights and the one to protect girls' sports, there were a lot of assaults, vandalism, intimidation of signature gatherers. Many of those ended up resulting in police reports, some that have already, ended up in folks being prosecuted and convicted in some of these cases. He said they're really hoping that's not going to be the case this time around. Maybe people have learned their lesson. And he says there has been no shortage of folks that have been reaching out to them saying, I want to go out. I want to be a petition gatherer for this effort to potentially repeal the income tax. So, going to be watching for that to come in the days ahead. And now to the complaint filed today against a very popular Northwest podcaster, Brandi Kruse, and her Undivided podcast. The claim here is that she is being funded by Let's Go Washington. This is filed by the Washington for Ethical Government folks, which they describe themselves as a citizen campaign and government watchdog group. So they have filed this formal request with the PDC for an investigation into Brandi Kruse and Let's Go Washington. We were just talking about them. They cite 159 instances of what they say are undisclosed and unreported political advertising by who they describe as a right-wing content creator, Brandi Kruse, in support of Haywood's ballot initiatives. So, full disclosure, I've been out at many of those rallies for Let's Go Washington's initiatives, covering those as a reporter for the Center Square. And Brandi's often at those rallies, speaking there, introducing various speakers coming up and urging people to support the initiatives. But she is an influencer, a podcaster, and a journalist. She used to work, you remember, at Channel 13 for many years before she launched off on her own with the Undivided podcast. Well, the assertion from this group who's asked the PDC to investigate is that Let's Go Washington is funding her. I haven't seen any documentation that Let's Go Washington is funding her. And when pressed for that during today's media availability announcing this complaint that's been filed, they didn't provide any documentation, although they say there's all these instances where she's appeared at Let's Go Washington events, and they're making the correlation there. Well, this group again says it's a matter for the Public Disclosure Commission to ultimately decide, and potentially they suggest even change the rules. Their complaint basically says if right now PDC rules don't preclude an influencer, a podcaster like Brandi, from potentially influencing an election, then maybe we should change the rules such that you can't have that kind of speech. This has been an issue, one that we waded into here at the Center Square. You may recall we've talked about this quite a bit, and I've written about it extensively at the Center Square Washington's page that our organization, the Center Square, was initially denied press credentials to cover the Washington state legislature. They were contending that we weren't legitimate journalists. We had to fight that a bit, ultimately won, and were granted press credentials, and we've been there to cover the last three. I have been there to cover the last three legislative sessions. But there's been some pushback, and Ari Hoffman, KVI's conservative talk show host for the afternoons, Jonathan Cho with the Discovery Institute, he's also been denied press credentials, as has Brandi Kruse. Brandi was ultimately granted credentials to be in the wings of the Senate, but not the House. All that to say, this is an evolving story with, how do you separate journalism from a podcaster who potentially has influence? Of course, radio hosts are known to have opinions. Podcasters are known to have opinions, but there's a lot of wiggle room there. And there is precedent here from a 2007 case that was ruled in favor of KVI talk show host John Carlson and Kirby Wilbur. Full disclosure, I worked for KVI at the time in 2007 when this matter was decided ultimately in the favor of KVI, and it would seem this ruling is applicable. They basically said, on-air commentary and political support by talk radio hosts are not in-kind contributions. In other words, a radio talk show host, potentially now an influencer on a podcast, social media, is not the same thing as an in-kind contribution. So you're entitled to your opinion. You can say that. It doesn't mean it's an in-kind contribution from whatever you're endorsing at that moment. So the question is, how far will this be expanded? Potentially to podcasters, even like myself, for stories that we cover at the Center Square and in Washington in Focus daily. So this is a really important story, obviously, to us for personal reasons, but for a greater context, because a lot of people these days get their news content from social media, and those people they consider to be journalists. So this is a very important story, one we promise that we're going to stay on top of. And in today's final segment for Washington in Focus Daily, the Professional Educator Standards Board, what they call PESB, is rewriting the rules. And the superintendent, if you have a child in a school district, the superintendent in your school district could be on the hook here for this. It was brought to my attention that this week there are 2 days of meetings, Thursday and Friday, by this board. And on Friday, they are taking a final vote on changes to the Washington Administrative Code, the WAC, that will give basically state bureaucrats the power to discipline and potentially even fire state school superintendents. This has to do with House Bill 1296. You may recall this was passed by majority Democrats during the 2025 legislative session to basically undo the Parental Bill of Rights, which they had adopted a year before. And this is to say, schools, if they want to keep secrets from parents, if the child says, don't tell mom and dad that I've asked you to call me Bobby, not Susie, at school, or I've asked to speak with a counselor about my gender confusion, you can't tell my parents. This obviously has caused a lot of controversy, and that's why we have our initiative going to the ballot this November for voters. But right now, regardless of the ballot measure and regardless of the fact that we have the Department of Justice looking into our Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, we have this board at the urging of our Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction and Superintendent Chris Reykdal, urging them to say, you must comply with 1296, and we have to make sure that superintendents know if they're not toeing the line on this gender identity stuff, that we can remove them from office. It will be deemed misconduct. And that's what this PESB board is voting on Friday afternoon. So I had an opportunity to speak with Vicki Murray at Washington Policy Center. She is their education center director. She's trying to bring some attention to this. Here's part of that conversation.
This is just the latest fallout from House Bill 1296, passed last year by the legislature, that gutted the Parental Bill of Rights. So not only are we, basically advancing a policy to keep parents in the dark, and Washington, the people of Washington over and over again have said they don't want this. This is why we passed the Parents' Bill of Rights, to begin with. Schools cannot keep secrets from their parents. Buried in HB 1296, which rolled back, gutted the Parents' Bill of Rights, there is a whole section that says that the Professional Educator Standards Board, or PESB, is responsible for making sure that the Washington Administrative Code and other rules conform with the new legislation. And so they were tasked by this law to basically hold superintendents accountable. And let's be very clear about what this law is doing, what it means by accountability. It doesn't mean that we're going to be accountable to parents, or that we're going to hold superintendents, make them accountable to the local school boards. They're going to be accountable to Olympia and Olympia only. And that notion has been rejected time and time again by the people of Washington and by Washington parents.
So one of those school districts deemed out of compliance with all this is Kennewick. The Kennewick School Board has voted to say we're not going to allow boys in our girls' bathrooms and sports, and we're not going to embrace the gender ideology, the pronoun mandates from OSPI. They've received warning letters in the past from OSPI basically saying you're out of compliance. They push back saying, well, we're in compliance with federal guidelines and what the Trump administration has said on this, and we're waiting for further directive. So I had a conversation today with Kennewick School Board President Gabe Galbraith about this.
And they're ultimately trying to get rid of anyone who's pushing back on them, right? I mean, you have local elected leaders in their community who are tasked with hiring a superintendent to carry out the mission of that school district. And now you're essentially threatening a superintendent with willful noncompliance when they work for the school board. So the state is coming in here essentially trying to dig their hand in local control and essentially threaten these superintendents with these things. And they're just encroaching way too far. And the fact that they want to hold school board directors who are elected by their community accountable for these things, it's way over the top. And again, they do this every year. So something comes up they don't like, they find a way to push back, just like they did with 1296 when they took the initiative and rewrote the legislation and all that stuff.
And this afternoon, I received a response from the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, Chris Reykdal's office. I said, are you guys the ones that have pushed for the board to, make these changes and try to hold superintendents accountable if they're not compliant with your directive. And this is the response I received. Says the complaint process has not yet been established, so no district leader has been found to have been willfully non-compliant. OSPI has been working in partnership with PESB on their required rulemaking. So I take that to mean that OSPI has been encouraging this board to, make sure that you're going to hold school district superintendents, accountable. If they're out of compliance with this bill, then we need to make sure that, we're holding them accountable, potentially removing them from their positions. So much going on here with the DOJ investigation. The voters are going to weigh in November. I would guess that there's probably not going to be a lot of push back and forth on this outside of this vote from the board, as far as any, rules out of compliance for any districts that OSPI is going to say, I'm going to fine you or withhold your funding. I don't think that's going to happen. I think they're waiting for, further salvos in this to take place. So that is it for today's episode of Washington in Focus. As always, thank you for watching. Join us again tomorrow. Have a great day.